Good morning, class. Today we will be discussing the year 2020 and what happened in that year. As the 30th anniversary, actually, of this year has crept up on us. So let's get into it. The way this year began was very tragic with the death of cultural icon Kobe Bryant, who was killed in a helicopter accident. And besides the pandemic, I'd say this was the biggest event that happened in the year, which affected the most people. So, very grim start to the year. Now, the next biggest thing that happened was the pandemic of the coronavirus, which originated in China. It was not contained very well at all. The federal government, as well as the people themselves, didn't take the situation seriously. Travel was not shut down until it was already too late. People were leaving their houses, going to work, going to school, going to the grocery store, etc., just spreading the disease without even knowing it. Sorry, the virus. And ultimately, the hospitals were overwhelmed with the patients and did not have enough equipment to treat all that were affected. So the next thing we'll talk about is the stock market crash, which was a very big deal. Pretty much immediately, once the U.S. felt the wave of coronavirus victims in our country rise, the stock market immediately crashed. Many were affected. Many people lost their retirement. Many people lost their personal investments. Just all around the board, a lot of money lost. But one thing I'd like to say about this particular part of the situation is that the stock market, although it crashed, it made up all of its points in nearly a day. And as you know, the stock market is very influential when something worldwide or nationally happens, either positive or negative. So it was not very surprising that this happened. And although it crashed pretty hard, it eventually did come back up. So that's a positive. The way it affected the people of the United States is, one, the crash of the stock market. Two, it affected the children from the 6-year-olds in kindergarten all the way up to students in college. All schools were shut down. All adults, many adults were poverty-ridden who had no savings. They couldn't work. Most adults couldn't work. And it affected society as a whole, just relying very heavily on our technological resources, including computers, phones, just basically staying at home and communicating through our technology. But the people that this virus affected the most were people 60 years of age and older, and people who had underlying health issues, specifically respiratory issues, when exposed to the virus would be proven fatal, which was very upsetting to many families and very devastating to the world as a whole. The thing I remember most specifically about the event, I was still in school, so what I remember most is being almost excited that school was canceled. You know, you're always excited as a kid when you don't have to go to school, but then feeling the harsh reality um, through the media. Social media was very big, and it was easy to see that this was not only going to be just the closure of school, but having to do online school, having to stay home all day, not seeing your friends, not seeing your extended family. It's very tough mentally, and just having to stay strong is what I remember most. I was not, I did not have anybody in my family that was directly affected by the disease, or I mean by the virus, sorry. Thankfully, but living in the city of Atlanta, a large industrial area with a population of over 5 million people at the time, there were many cases. It was probably the biggest hub of cases, I'd say, in the South as a whole. So living in Atlanta, me and my family had to be very cautious about where we went, about who we were around, and we were very cautious about staying at home and just self-quarantining and knocking this thing out. That's what I remember. And how did it affect me personally? Personally, it was very difficult. As a young kid, as a 17-year-old, I was very active, and staying inside wasn't my favorite thing to do, so it really limited my exercise. It really limited many people's sports. It happened right as baseball season started, so baseball players were not able to finish their seasons. All spring sports were canceled in college. And then the NCAA canceled the March Madness bracket. It was a serious event. So personally, having no sports to watch, cooped up at home, it was a very difficult situation, but we made the most of it, and here we are today. How and when the pandemic ended? Well, it was not a very positive note. Just over 1 million deaths occurred worldwide. I'd say millions of people were actually affected, but like I said before, only really older people and people with underlying health issues were affected, like more than just like the average flu. So worldwide, it totaled around 1 million deaths, and it ended by people staying home. The government pretty much just shut down the entire nation and made everyone stay home. There was a national curfew of 9 o'clock, I believe. It was a serious situation, and we just got through it by self-quarantining, and eventually a cure was recognized, and we wiped it out for good. The long-term consequences of this situation, after this, many people were stuck in poverty. Jobs were lost. Companies were having to lay off thousands of workers, and it just created a very difficult situation economically, not only for the nation, but for the world as a whole. Many loved ones were lost, which was a big deal, which was a big element to the situation. And a positive note, though, is we knew how to handle, if this were ever to happen again, we were prepared, and we knew how to handle the situation in the future. So that was a positive note, you could say. The 2020 presidential election was actually postponed as voters could not get out and they didn't want to risk any faulty voting scandals online. So the whole election was postponed until the situation was under control and people were allowed to get out of their homes again, which was 2 months after the election. So it wasn't too big of a situation. I think the federal government handled it well in that sense, and we just moved on, and Trump was elected president again, so it wasn't that big of a deal anyway. And the final thing I'd like to mention is how we as a world prevented any virus like this afterwards. Is we just were more aware of our surroundings. We became cleanlier as a whole, I would say, and the government became more aware of viruses and diseases that could potentially put us in this situation again. A lot of money, a lot of federal money was put into research, scientific research over diseases and viruses, and the U.S. Reached out to third world, even fourth world countries about cleanliness and just keeping the community virus free, I'd say.